questions? Okay, wonderful. All right, well, it's 4 o'clock, so we will just get going as people keep joining us. Welcome to the inaugural kickoff of the Powerful Project Speaker Series with Kelly Dorfman. The Powerful Project is a nonprofit whose mission is to connect children and adults with mental health services. We are so glad that you're taking the time to be here today to learn and receive this valuable information from Kelly, how to optimize immune function to resist COVID. Now I'm going to ask if everybody please make sure that their microphone is muted, and it's fine if your camera is on or off, whatever is your preference. Our first sponsor today is WePlay Occupational Therapy. WePlay is a pediatric occupational therapy clinic that specializes in infants, children, and teens. The director, Flory Glusman, started the clinic many years ago, back in 2003, and she and her incredible staff recognize the importance that nutrition plays in all children, especially our children who deal with sensory integration challenges. So we are so fortunate to have WePlay as an ongoing support of all that we do. Our second sponsor is the Zones of Regulation, also developed by another esteemed OT colleague, Leah Kuipers. And Leah and her team provide trainings and workshops for parents, educators, therapists, supporting self-regulation and emotional control. And currently they have a free online event that you can sign up for on their website, zonesofregulation.com. And we'll be having an interview next year in 2022 with Leah. Our third sponsor is Perspectives Center for Holistic Therapy. Perspectives is a holistic psychotherapy and speech-language feeding social thinking therapy practice that treats the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. And they provide individual counseling, therapy, groups, workshops for children, teens, and adults of all ages. And you can get more information on their website, perspectivesholistictherapy.com, to learn more about they have many free groups and workshops for kids and adults. We also have Two Thumbs Up. They are another nonprofit, and the director of this, Two Thumbs Up, created this nonprofit with the intention to provide social opportunities, connecting neurodiverse youth with neurotypical youth. And they have incredible free events. So I highly recommend checking out twothumbsupinc.com for their events. And lastly, and you'll hear more about this at the very end, but Vital.com is a conscious clothing company inspired by sacred geometry, and they're offering a discount to everybody on this call today. So those are a little bit about our sponsors for Kelly's talk today. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce Kelly. Kelly Dorfman is one of the world's foremost experts on using nutrition therapeutically to improve brain function, energy, and mood. And I've had the privilege to get to work with Kelly for well over 15 years. I think we're getting close to 18 years, supporting children with speech, language, feeding, communications, social challenges, as well as adults with complex ailments and symptoms. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So supporting children and adults with complex symptoms and challenges from low tone, autism, mitochondrial issues, CP, ADD, you name it. Kelly has the keen detective skills to help identify core issues and then create a plan using nutrition to make significant positive changes in growth, health, and development. Kelly understands the brain and the body like no other. She is an extraordinary nutrition expert and human. And it is with gratitude and my pleasure to welcome Kelly Dorfman as our first speaker for the Powerful Project nonprofit virtual speaker series. And at the very end of Kelly's talk, there will be some time for Q&A. So I just ask that you type in your questions in the chat, and then we will answer as many questions as we can. And if your question doesn't get answered, you'll have Kelly's contact information to send her the question after the presentation today. So thank you so much. And Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lauren. Welcome everybody to probably your 942nd Zoom conference of the year. I know for me it's my 214th bad hair day in a row. But anyway, let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, which is COVID and how to get out of this and alive, hopefully. I want to start with a little bit of a disclosure. There is no known cure or proven prevention apart from avoidance for COVID-19. And all treatments and preventative measures remain experimental. So this presentation contains no medical advice. Please talk to your doctor for any specific questions concerning your family's health. So having said that, let's just talk about what's going on. There's been so much going on with COVID. I'm sure like the rest of you, I've been doing a lot of reading and studying. I actually met with a friend of mine who works at the FDA, and I plowed his mind for the latest and greatest, and he's just about as mystified as the rest of us. So let's just talk about what we know and what can be done, because what I'm hoping to do, and the reason we decided this would be a good subject for the Powerful Project, is because we want to empower people. We want to empower people to feel like you're not just a victim of this. There's a lot you can do that can help prevent yourself from getting a bad case of COVID. Of course, there's no way to completely stop getting COVID that we know of, but we certainly know that most people can have a mild case of it. And if you do run into it, that's what you want to have. So the bad news is that this is a virus that spreads very efficiently, and its ability to spread is improving as it mutates over time. In fact, I'm sure you've heard about the new variant that's coming from England, the Great Britain variant. And it's not that this is a more deadly version of the virus, it's just a version that spreads better. And that's for a virus that's already spreading pretty well. So this is what's happened. This is a particularly good spreading virus. All viruses spread well. This is a super excellent spreader, and the new variant's an even better spreader than the other ones. It mutates aggressively. There's 31 variants found of at least 10 samples, and even with the new variant, there's been between 17 and 30 different variants found. So there's many different variations of this virus. Half of Americans have pre-existing conditions that increase their risk to serious infection. And that's what we want to talk about today, how to get you out of some of that high risk group, because those are the people that are really suffering the most with this virus. It disproportionately affects lower income families, the elderly, those with asthma and obesity, and first responders. We think it affects first responders more because they're exposed to such a concentration of it. Physical distancing slows the spread, but it does not stop it. So that's really important to know. It just does seem to slow things down, but it's not stopping this virus. And the available vaccines do not cure or prevent infection, but may reduce the severity. And those are coming around right now. So believe it or not, this is what a COVID-19 infected cell looks like. You see those little red dots that are all along that? Those are the little virus pieces. So viruses are little strings of nucleic acids. If you remember from high school biology, nucleic acids are the building blocks of genetic material. And so it turns out that COVID-19 is about a 7,500 string of nucleic acids. And believe it or not, that's considered tiny. Bacteria have millions of nucleic, or millions of these, but viruses, this virus in particular has 7,500. And China released the whole code for the virus last January, a year ago, and that's how they have made the vaccine. The infection causes the growth of those little white hairs. See those little white hairs there? Those are, they're called fallopia, and they're like a highway that helps move these viruses to the neighboring cells. The viruses need this because they can't replicate themselves. They're so small that they have to find some another place to be like the uterus for them, and that's your cells. So basically the viruses come in and they insert their genetic material, and they take over the nucleus of the cell that they infected, and they use it as a viral replicating machine, like that movie Alien. Remember Alien, where where the alien goes, I don't know, it goes into your nose or mouth, and then it takes over and then it kind of bursts out? That's exactly the way viruses work. So whoever came up with that movie just understood the way viruses operate. They cannot replicate themselves. But once they come in and they inject their genetic material, and viruses are just a piece of genetic material, they're a bunch of RNA, in this case, COVID-19, but there are also DNA viruses. So they inject their genetic material in, and then once they take over that cell is dead. It can't do anything good for you anymore. It can only be a viral replicating machine. So to get rid of those viruses, you have to get rid of those cells. So if you ever have a cold, that cold is your immune system recognizing that a virus is infecting and kicking out all of the destroyed cells. So when you have a bad cold, you go and all that blood is coming out. That's because the immune system did not notice that you had viral infiltration until a lot of cells were infected, and then it was a big mess to clean them out. So the reason we're not going to have a cure for the common cold is because the common cold is the cure for the virus. So the good news is that 80% of the cases for this virus are pretty mild, according to the World Health Organization and the Chinese Center for Disease Control. Children's symptoms are less severe, and it's only estimated that 1 in 1,000 develop any kind of notable inflammatory condition. So that's very good news, and that's part of the push for us to get the schools back open, is because it looks like the kids are pretty good. However, the teachers may not be in such good shape, but the kids seem to be handling this pretty well. The mortality is not higher than the seasonal flu. Now, this sounds really funny because we've had a lot of controversy about this, but let me explain how this works. COVID-19 is the Costco of viruses. And by Costco, I mean it works on volume. So it's not particularly more deadly than a regular seasonal flu, but it's going to reach many more people. So if the death rate is 1 to 3%, and you reach many, many more people, you're going to see the kind of numbers we're seeing. So it's not the MERS virus, MERS, that was out several years ago. That virus had almost a 30% mortality rate, which is very high. And so that was nasty. That was a very nasty virus. But this virus has, slightly higher. In this country, the mortality rate is higher because of our problems with obesity and chronic health conditions, unfortunately. We've been compared often to China. Their obesity rate is apparently around 8%. Our obesity rate is more like 38%. Lifestyle changes can put most people at low risk categories, and a strong immune system helps you to fight off viral infections. And there's evidence that specific nutrients might help in this condition, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So I came up with 6 steps to improve immune function and general health that can help you when facing this. And so I have them listed with all kinds of fun action words. So we can increase vitamin C intake. We can heal by sleeping 8 hours a night, and consider melatonin for further support for that. We can optimize by optimizing weight and microbiome health using whole foods and less empty calorie foods. And there's a lot of really interesting research coming out about that. We can boost zinc intake. We can strengthen ourselves with exercise daily, and we can maximize vitamin D intake and levels. So let's talk a little bit about each one of these, and then I can answer questions. And there are other things to do also. There's some less well-studied. I mean, nothing's been completely well-studied, but there's some less well-studied things that can be useful too. But these things have pretty robust, I think, support for them. So let's start with vitamin C. How can vitamin C help immune function? Well, first of all, vitamin C increases the production of lymphocytes. These are a type of white blood cell, and neutrophil migration. Neutrophil is another type of white blood cell. Why is this particularly important for COVID? COVID does not create a strong antibody response. It does create an antibody response, but you'll notice if you've been reading articles that when people have had COVID and they've tested their antibody levels, they don't stay up very long. And that's because they're pretty sure that this particular virus elicits a lymphocyte response. It's a different kind of white cell response. And so vitamin C can help that. It neutralizes unstable molecules, which are called free radicals, so that it's good for that. Vitamin C decreases inflammation. It protects the skin by boosting collagen production and improving wound healing. So the skin is one of the barriers for things coming in. So that's good. Repair is always good. One of the symptoms of vitamin C deficiency, believe it or not, are these tiny little broken blood vessels. They look like little red dots. And that's because it breaks down the blood cell membranes. It boosts phagocyte activity. These are immune cells that destroy bacteria. And there can be secondary bacterial infections sometimes after you've had a viral infection. And we've heard about these long haulers who are having long-term problems with this virus. And it modulates cytokine activity. Of course, the deadly thing about COVID-19 is the cytokine storm. And this is an overreaction by the immune system, and vitamin C can help with that. High dose vitamin C used intravenously has been used a little bit for COVID treatment. Very high doses given as IV might reduce inflammation and severe respiratory illness. We found this in other viruses before. And in other studies, it has reduced time spent on respirator by people who get acute respiratory infection. Studies in China and Italy are looking at IV vitamin C as a treatment for COVID. And in the 2019 studies of severe acute respiratory infections, 46% of the patients died in the placebo group, but only 30% in the group that got IV vitamin C. So that's almost 50% better. So vitamin C looks like it's very, very promising. The daily requirement for vitamin C is about 90 milligrams. Something to know about it, it is very heat sensitive and it's not stable in liquid. So if you think you're getting your vitamin C drinking your orange juice, not happening unless you're squeezing that orange juice and you grow the oranges in your backyard. Because by the time they take the oranges from Guatemala or from Florida or wherever they're coming from, and they sit around for a long time, the vitamin C has a tendency to break down. Still in all, fresh juice would be better. But again, vitamin C is not that stable. So it can be tough in the wintertime to get your vitamin C requirement. Humans are one of the very few mammals that don't make it. Guinea pigs don't make it. If you've ever had a pet guinea pig, you know you have to put vitamin C in the water because they don't make vitamin C. And certain kinds of monkeys don't make it. But other than that, most mammals, dogs, cats, you don't have to give them vitamin C because they make it. And they make loads of it. So to boost immune response, we think that 500 milligrams a day is often recommended. Again, talk to your healthcare practitioner, but that's sort of an area to think about it. A deficiency for vitamin C is a weak immune system. Bleeding gums, easy bruising, I mentioned those little red dots that you can see, a slow wound healing, and the bright red hair follicles, I was just telling you about that, and a very, very severe deficiency. Most people say, oh, the deficiency is scurvy. This is like bleeding and gross gums, but that's way far down the road. Before that, you can be seeing these other symptoms. So boost your vitamin C. And number 2, heal by sleeping more. So let's talk about sleep. We all have time to sleep now, no excuses, except if you're a mother at home trying to help your kids doing the schoolwork, then I guess you still have a very good excuse. But but you're not going out at night or going to meetings or going to meet friends. So hopefully you can get a little bit more sleep. We know that when animals are forced to stay awake, the genes that cause cell death and activate, and the stress hormones go up. It reduces emotional regulation, and different studies find that it both heightens emotional problems and blunts emotional response. Now, there's a UK study that's been done that found about 75% of people are reporting sleep changes since the pandemic. So even though you might have time to sleep, you may not be sleeping as deeply or as well because anxiety is also up. We know that another study found that anxiety is up 300%, and this is almost across the world, and depression's up 400% since this pandemic. Increased risk to obesity with low sleep. In fact, they've done weight loss studies where they find that if people sleep 8 to 9 hours a night, they lose weight more easily, because people confuse tiredness and hunger. So if you're hungry at 10 o'clock at night, you're not hungry, you're tired, okay? Especially unless you haven't eaten dinner for some reason. And so if you're trying to stay up, or you're, running around and you think you're hungry, it's usually because you're just tired. Also, of course, insufficient sleep affects immune functioning. It decreases pain tolerance also. So lots of issues with sleep. There's been some research looking at melatonin and sleep in COVID. There was data collected at the Cleveland Clinic, and this was really interesting. They found that people that were taking melatonin who got COVID, about 50% when they were on they were on ventilators in this one study. They were like 50% less likely to die from COVID. That's a lot less. And actually, President Trump was given melatonin when he was hospitalized with COVID, believe it or not. It calibrates the immune system response, and it prevents your immune system from overreacting. So there's been some work, and I actually have a patient who did this. She kept herself out of the hospital. She had a severe case of COVID. She took 10 milligrams 4 times a day. I'm not recommending that, but I'm just telling you that that is one strategy that's been used. And even though she was starting to have trouble with breathing problems, she was able to keep out of the hospital and heal and overcome the whole COVID situation without further problems. And ACE studies are currently looking at these correlations to see if melatonin should be part of a treatment protocol. Insomnia is a common symptom post-COVID for people also. And one of the reasons we know that elderly people have more problems with COVID is that when you're 80, you can have only 10% of the melatonin levels of a 5-year-old. And this is, when you think about COVID is one of the very few illnesses that kids don't get, that adults get worse. I mean, let's face it, kids get everything, and that adults don't get. But COVID's something that most kids get, and there's not much to it. So one of the questions is, why is that? And one of the answers may be that they naturally have higher melatonin levels, which modulates immune response and will stop them from having some of these more exaggerated immune responses that go with COVID. So that may be part of that puzzle. And as you get older, your melatonin levels just naturally go down. And we all know that as you get older, sleep can be more of a problem too. It can be harder to get deeper sleep. We know women after menopause seem to have trouble with sleep as their hormones change, and melatonin may be useful for that. Also, sleep scarcity. You know that sleep deprivation kills faster than starvation. And it was Stalin's favorite form of torture because it made people very malleable and easy to manipulate. If it takes you less than 5 minutes to fall asleep, you are sleep deprived. Okay, so this can cause functional defects similar to being mildly drunk, basically. And the National Sleep Foundation recommends 8 to 10 hours of sleep for teenagers and 7 to 9 hours for adults. So if you're looking at melatonin, of course, talk to your healthcare provider. If you take too much melatonin, you don't need it, you will wake up groggy, or you may find that you have bad dreams. Those are the most common side effects with melatonin. Some people have, very, very few people have the opposite response where they kind of wake up instead of get sleep with melatonin, but mostly it's well tolerated by people. It's a hormone that's made in the middle of your brain, the pineal gland, and what it does is it responds to darkness. So when it starts getting dark, the melatonin levels in your body start to go up. It mostly has been found to help with sleep latency, which is trouble falling asleep, but it does help some people stay asleep. I mentioned that it has immune modulating properties. And if you're looking at which kind of melatonin supplements to get, you need to know that all melatonin supplements are synthetic. They all contain synthetic melatonin. Think about this. Where would you get natural melatonin? That's right, from an animal brain. And we don't want to do that because of mad cow disease. You don't want to have pig melatonin or cow melatonin. So literally 100% of melatonin that's sold as supplements is synthetic. What you're buying is the dose and the form of it. whether it's a milk tab or a liquid or a capsule or a spray. The dose ranges between 0.5 and 10 milligrams. It's usually taken 30 minutes before bed. Some doctors are prescribing up to 40 milligrams, and I've even heard higher for active COVID cases. And again, talk to your healthcare provider if you have any questions about that. So the third strategy is to deal with your gut ecosystem and to look at what you can do to support that. So the gut ecosystem is the digestive system, is a complicated ecosystem. Think of it as your own private little garden. So it's home to most of the 100 trillion bacteria in your body. That's more bacteria than cells in your body. That's a load of bacteria. It weighs a couple pounds, actually. And the chemistry in the environment is constantly changing depending on the general diet and your health. There's good bacteria and bad bacteria and funguses, and these are the plants of your ecosystem. So as I mentioned, there's 100 trillion microorganisms. That's 10 times the number of cells in your body. That means you're more bug than you. It regulates your immune system dramatically, the endocrine system, and digestion. Believe it or not, it has 115 times the number of genes in the bacteria in your gut than the genes in your body. And it weighs 2 to 6 pounds. It creates a lot of compounds that impact mood. There's actually a whole realm of study called psychobiotics. There was just a big study in Nature magazine about how this is becoming big in psychology now and mental health. We're looking at people's guts as part of the reason for their anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges. So how does this affect COVID specifically? More than half the people affected with COVID have gut symptoms. There are receptor sites for the COVID virus in the GI system. Most of you probably know that the COVID virus enters the cell through something called an ACE receptor, and those are found also in your gut. There's these kind of receptors. So when microbes eat fiber, it turns them into short chain fatty acids. So when you have enough fiber in your diet, the good bacteria in your gut chews this up. The stuff that you can't digest, it digests. And this helps to protect your system against allergic responses, and it reduces inflammation. So the effectiveness of the nutritional situation with the gut, we're just trying to really explore this. So this is the breaking microbiome news about COVID. Several studies have identified an altered gut microbiome in patients with COVID-19. And what they've done is they've identified specific species of bacteria that are either protective, that are in people who don't have COVID, or missing, and so making people more susceptible. There's a second paper that's pending review that found the composition of the gut microbiome was the strongest predictor of COVID-19 severity. And now again, this is a reflection of your general health to some extent, but the presence of one bacteria in this particular, again, unpublished study, is pending review, is that this one E. faecalis was a robust predictor of the severity. Its presence was associated with chronic inflammation. So then when they saw more of this E. faecalis bacteria, they knew there was more inflammation and the person would have a more serious case. There's a lot of kind of wonky science going on right now with COVID because a lot of the peer review papers are under pressure to get these research things out faster. So they're sometimes bending the rules a little bit, or they're kind of pre-publishing, or people are saying this paper might be coming out. So there's been some complaining in the medical community that they've lowered their standards for some of these research projects. So, we just don't know what this all is going to look like, but this is what is happening in the field right now. So here are some foods that are rich in probiotics. If you want to add good bacteria to your diet, in general, you want to have a good diet because that's what makes the bacteria the happiest. But if you want to actually add some more species to your diet, there's all kinds of kombucha. There's I just heard of a new one called Janny from my son who grows all kinds of wacky kombuchas. There's a kefir. There's a raw sauerkraut or raw pickles. They can have trillions of bacteria in a serving of them. So you can get these from food. Also, is it as important as good bacteria are the food for good bacteria, which are called prebiotics, okay? And these are fibers that the bacteria can eat and digest, but you can't. So they're resistant starches like fructans and fructooligosaccharides. And again, we can't digest them, but the bacteria in your gut can. And some of the research now for the microbiome is looking more heavily into prebiotics than actually even probiotics, because who knows if the bacteria you're eating in a capsule or in a food is going to make it through the acid in your stomach and the digestive enzymes and all that kind of stuff. So if you give them the fiber, it's more like we're going to give them the fertilizer and then hope that the garden grows better. So people under stress crave sugar and carbs. And we've all heard COVID-19 referred to as the COVID-19 pounds, right? Because everybody's eating a lot more junk, and because we're all under a lot more stress, and we're working right next to our refrigerator in the kitchen. And so it's just too easy to be doing that. So I just want to mention that if your body's calling for more cookies, you're not alone. That's what stress does. Mild to moderate stress, your body craves sugar, it craves fast-burning carbohydrates, because over the short run, that reduces your stress hormones, believe it or not. Over the long run, that can be a problem in terms of general health, but over the short run, it gives you a sense of feeling better because it takes down your stress hormones. So mild elevation of blood sugar over time cause blood sugar to bind with proteins, and this can also increase inflammation. So realize you're going to want more sugar, but keep an eye on that, because that can lead to more problems with inflammation, and that will also increase your risk of issues. So just to review the good diet principles, if you want a good microbiome, you need a good diet to feed it. You want higher anti-inflammation foods. Those are like wild fish, whole fruits and vegetables, multicolored vegetables, especially the green ones, green tea, water, olive oil, lean poultry, nuts, legumes, and seeds, and whole grains, especially organic, because we know that many of the not organically raised grains now are laced with Roundup, unfortunately. And then you want to reduce your inflammatory foods, which is sugar from any source, even though we're all craving that right now as a comfort food. Processed food, French fries or fried foods of all types, white and heavily processed grains and ice cream, and the list of the junk foods. So one thing you might think about doing is just some small steps, and one of those small steps that I like to emphasize is reducing sweet drinks. Because people don't usually think about their sugar content in terms of what they're drinking. They think about the cookies and brownies they're eating, and oopsies, they forgot about all the sweetened iced tea and chai and Starbucks that they've been taking in. So luckily, there's all kinds of very cool no-calorie flavored waters and unsweetened tea and coffee and sugary versus the sugary drinks. A friend of mine for my birthday just gave me these there are citrus extracts in little powder. There's citrus orange and citrus lemon and citrus lime. And you just put some in some fuzzy water, and it gives you this really intense carbonated drink with absolutely no calories or sugar in it. Very, very tasty. She said that if you mix it with plain yogurt, which I don't eat, but many of you will, it's a plain yogurt and a little bit of maple syrup. It's like eating cheesecake. This is one idea. So you can eat some vegetables every day. Stop eating at 7 p.m. Because if you feel hungry at night, you're tired or you're bored. And you can use something like MyFitnessPal or Headspace or another tracker app to better understand your eating habits if you're having a hard time figuring out where things are going wrong. All right, so we also mentioned boosting zinc levels. So zinc, of course, is a very important mineral, specifically for immune function, also for growth hormone. Zinc deficiency causes immune deficiency. In fact, immune deficiency is one of the symptoms of zinc deficiency. It's needed to create antibodies and activate immune cells such as T lymphocytes. And you'll recall that COVID-19 elicits a T lymphocyte response. And so you want those lymphocytes ready for action. It activates enzymes that break down proteins in viruses and bacteria that allow them to spread. And back to President Trump's fights with COVID, when he first got the first round when they thought he had COVID, they were giving him 150 milligrams of zinc along with the experimental drugs that they're not using anymore that drive zinc into the cells. So zinc is very important. If there's enough zinc inside the cell, the virus really can't replicate itself. It's hard for it to invade and take over your nuclear DNA. We know that zinc lozenges reduce the duration of common cold up to 40% by helping the immune system to respond better. And 2010 Netherlands study found that zinc inhibited SARS-CoV. This was not the type that we have now, not the two, but replication in cell cultures related to the SARS outbreak of 2003. So the minimum requirements for zinc are about 8 milligrams for women and adolescents and 11 for men, 5 milligrams for children under age 8. The deficiency symptoms, ready for this one? Loss of taste and smell. Does that sound familiar? That's a symptom, of course, of SARS-2, COVID-19, people losing their sense of taste and smell. My question is, could they be zinc deficient? Or did the SARS-CoV infection throw them over the wall with that zinc deficiency? Some people may need supplements to assure sufficiency because lead, aluminum, arsenic, copper, and iron can all displace this. In old studies with women who were pregnant, they found they were using so much iron and prenatal vitamins that it was lowering zinc. And so they have gotten better about putting more zinc in prenatal vitamins. You may wish to avoid zinc nasal sprays as they sometimes interfere with smell. So better to take that in a lozenge or a capsule. And too much can cause stomach discomfort or imbalance other minerals. So I just want to give you some good food sources for zinc. And you'll see it's a little bit tricky to get zinc unless you eat some weird stuff. If you like oysters, you can get 327%, 36 milligrams. They're a bomb for zinc. But how many of us eat a lot of oysters? And none of us are going to oyster bars these days, right? But that's the number one. And then you'll see beef and chicken and meat. There are a lot of meats on this. Meats are very strong sources. If you don't eat meat, if you're vegan or vegetarian, you can look at tofu, which has 36%, which is 4 milligrams in firm tofu of zinc. And there are some seeds and lentils you can see 23%. But relative to meat, which really concentrates zinc, you have to be much more careful if you're eating a vegetarian diet to make sure you're getting sufficient zinc. And here are some vegan sources, and these are considered some of the stronger vegan sources for zinc. So exercise, why is exercise important with this whole thing? Well, we know that exercise improves your mood and immune function, and we're all sick of sitting around, right? So we know that it improves depression and anxiety in studies. Also, moderate exercise, not heavy exercise, but moderate exercise reduces cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and it reduces inflammation markers. Severe extreme exercise, like when you're training for a marathon, that can move more into pro-inflammatory, so that's a little bit different, but mild to moderate exercise is anti-inflammatory. It also helps your lungs and your airways to clear out, so that's really important also, and it increases white blood cell, immune cell circulation so they can detect illness faster. So I just want to give a shout out for exercise. I know that a lot of us are just getting discouraged and it's making it hard to get out there and get that done. And finally, and certainly not least in our list of 6 things to do, is vitamin D. And of all the research, probably in a single nutrient, vitamin D has the most robust. So we're going to call it vitamin D, but vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin, is a hormone. In fact, it is a steroid hormone, and it dramatically regulates immune function. If it was discovered today, it would not be in the vitamin category at all. It would be in the hormone category. It generates antimicrobial peptides that protect the lungs. Low vitamin D levels are associated with increases chances of getting sick. Also, low vitamin D levels are associated with an increased chance of recurrence for breast cancer and in women, and colon cancer in men. About 25% less respiratory infections in those who have enough. Usually in that the studies that looked at that, that was 40 mgs per milliliter of blood. That was associated with a reduced risk of respiratory infections. And here's something really interesting that many of you may not know. High fructose corn syrup, that's the stuff in soda and in many syrups out there, converts active vitamin D into the inactive form. And so heavy soda and junk food eating may be one reason why some people are having lower levels. But there's a lot more about vitamin D. If you really are interested in this, I highly recommend you check out this MedCram. MedCram is awesome. If you want to learn like something very technical online about something in medicine, this guy, I can't even pronounce his last name, Holt, perhaps. He can explain anything. He's awesome. And this is an hour-long talk on how vitamin D helps COVID. That's on YouTube. You can look it up. And anyway, they have found, and this is a number of studies, that over 90% of patients in the ICU with COVID were low in vitamin D. Over 90%. So just getting your vitamin D levels takes you down to 1 out of 10. This is ending up in the ICU. That seems like for a couple of pennies a day, a very smart thing to do. Vitamin D receptors on white blood cells fight COVID. And so these studies that were done in the UK, in Germany, and Spain all found that higher vitamin D intake strengthens response to COVID. And there's more studies that are ongoing with that. Inflammation markers also increase in vitamin D deficiency. So vitamin D is something that's really important. And of course, in the winter, what happens? Vitamin D levels go down. And if you live above North Carolina, now those of you from Georgia are below North Carolina, but those of us above North Carolina can't get enough vitamin D from the sun in the winter. And it used to be we were exposed with our face and our hands, but now we have a mask on, so you're only exposed with this little bit, perhaps, and not even your hands if they're covered up with gloves. So it's pretty tough to get vitamin D in the winter. And also, as you get older, your skin doesn't convert vitamin D as well. So the elderly also have trouble with this. So 15 minutes a day of sun exposure without sunscreen can make your daily requirement. Of course, if you're a woman, you're told by your esthetician or your dermatologist, don't you dare go outside for even 1 second to your car without having sunscreen on. So if you're wearing sunscreen, that's going to be blocking your vitamin D also. The general requirement, according to the government, is 400 to 1,000 international units a day. I find that most people need more than that. And the darker your skin, the more you need. Because there's just a higher requirement because of the way you convert it. The elderly do not activate vitamin D, as I mentioned, through the kidneys or absorb it through the skin as efficiently, so they may need more. And the only way to know if you have enough is to do a blood test. So if you have not had a blood test done in the last few years, you need to have your doctor the next time you go in for your OB/GYN appointment or for your yearly physical or for whatever reason, do a vitamin D level. And for COVID purposes, talk to your doctor, but generally most people I know are looking for 40 mgs or above, but above 30 is considered okay, which is, so you kind of pass with a D. Haha, that's a pun. you pass with a D, but not a vitamin D. So you really want it to be about 40 or above to really have your immune system in optimal shape. Okay, so We have about 10 minutes left, and I promise I would answer questions. This is the newest version of my book that just came out, believe it or not, a week ago, where we updated the information about wheat and gluten and glyphosate and what's been going on with that. And this is the way you can contact me if you have a question that you prefer not to ask here, or we don't get to it. So Lauren, do you have those questions?
I'm just, yes. The first question is, can zinc be helpful for patients who have recovered from COVID but have not regained their sense of taste and smell months later?
Excellent question. Yes, I think that's very possible that could be an issue. I wish that they would be collecting data on that, where they would be taking people's zinc levels when they lose their sense of smell and see what they are. And so we'd have a really solid scientific answer for that. But because we know that specifically zinc deficiency leads to that, I would say that post-COVID, if people have lost it and has not come back, they have not recovered from that, and that would be something to absolutely explore.
Yeah, any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. But since we're talking about zinc, Kelly, you want to mention something about zinc and picky eaters? There might be some that might be helpful.
Yes, I mean, one of the strategies we use to help people that are picky eaters is we try to increase zinc, and if people won't eat it because they're picky, we use it as a supplement. And the reason we do that, because one of zinc deficiency, before you get to the point where you lose your sense of smell and taste, is that things smell and taste different. And so it's hard to say what that means, because what does an apple taste like to you? It tastes like an apple tastes to you, but your apple might taste like my pear. I mean, we don't. How do you describe that, right? So we notice that some people that are picky will describe things that we have a hard time, we're scratching our head about, like, they act as if something tastes bitter that should taste sweet, or something tastes bad that should taste good. And so it's very possible that this is from an altered zinc response. And so yes, so that would be that's something to really think about.
Yeah. You spoke about gut bacteria. What are your thoughts on FMT?
Functional, that remind me what that is, Lauren.
Parisa, FMT stands for?
There's so many gut.
Oh, fecal matter transplant.
Oh, fecal.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, there's been, I have to say up front, it's illegal, because they wanted to have a study properly through the FDA to get approval. They've decided that poop is a possible medication, so they want to test it as such. But there's been some really good research in autism, and where they've done fecal transplants, and they have found tremendous. I mean, the numbers of kids that have improved have really bypassed a lot of other studies, because we know that kids on the spectrum tend to have worse spectrum symptoms that are relative to how bad their stomach symptoms are. So the worse their stomach symptoms are, it seems to be the worse, and they're having trouble with development in autism. And so I think that fecal transplant is something that's hopefully will come. But right now it's kind of in the shades, because we're not allowed technically to recommend it.
Right, thanks. Our next question, if you can't tolerate melatonin, are there any other supplements that can have a similar effect? For example, passion flower works great for me for sleep, but not melatonin.
Ah, interesting. Yes, well, you can. There's lots of other things you can use for sleep. I mean, so if melatonin doesn't work well for sleep for you, possibly you have enough melatonin that's regulating your immune system in a good way. So that's terrific. Other things that are used for sleep that can be useful are 5-HTP. 5-HTP stands for 5-hydroxytryptophan, and tryptophan is an amino acid, which is a building block of protein. That is the very step before serotonin. And serotonin goes up at night. So if your serotonin is up enough at night, you may not have restful enough sleep. So 5-HTP can be very useful. Some people like theanine. Theanine is a very calming amino acid that's very useful for some people for sleep. So that's another thing to look at. Passion flower is good. Valerian is another herb that is sometimes used. If you look at some of the sleep formulas at the health food store, they'll have a combination of some of these kind of herbs.
Great, thank you. Next question. How important is it for children to take supplements, zinc, vitamin C, D, etc.? My child refuses and is a picky eater. Welcome to our world.
Yes, well, that's a big question. Oh, before I forget about the sleep, I should mention this, but it's a sour subject. Turn off your computer for an hour before you go to bed if you have a sleep problem because of the blue light. Or, I mean, I can show you my really goofy blue light glasses, but I don't wear them when I'm presenting. But I have these 60% blocking. They look like very yellow to help because the blue light in the computers can be really stimulating. So if you're having a sleep problem, you want to make sure you're away from your computer for an hour. You can have a 30% screen. Most of the Apple products and computers have a button you can push or automatically go into a night mode, but you need more than that if you're sensitive. So in terms of supplements, that's a very good comprehensive question. There are so many ways to get supplements in now. It just might take some other, I mean, there's liquids, there's sprays, there's ways to mix them. There's all kinds of chewable versions. Sometimes we do when you get done with this, then we do that. Mostly we find when kids are very picky, we have to set up a structure for it so that it's not really a choice if they do it, but kind of how they do it.
Or when they do it.
Or when they do it, right. Because if you leave it, let's face it, kids these days don't have a lot of control over anything. And we were griping and moaning about that last year. So this year they got control over nothing. They're stuck at home in front of their computers, but gosh darn it, they can close their mouths. And so much of these power struggles end up in food when you think about it, because that's something they can really do, make me. And so we don't want to get into that place where we're doing make. We want to give them some control, but more over how and when rather than if. So we set up a when then, when you're done with this, then we're going to do that. Then will be time to turn on the television or whatever. And then we set up a structure so it behooves them to do it.
And with slightly older kids, or at least elementary age kids, what we have found is when kids understand the benefit of taking something and when they learn a little bit of how it works in their body or in their brain, of course, on age level, they might be more empowered to actually do something when they understand the why behind it, not just because we're telling you to. Yeah, we can talk about picky eaters
all day.
Any other questions before we wrap up? My teens have been craving kombucha lately. Are there certain brands or things to look for on labels, or do I need to learn how to make it?
Well, the thing about kombucha is that my complaint about kombucha is they sell them in 12-ounce bottles, and that's enough to blow out your microbiome. Yeah, can you drink that whole thing, Jen? No. So you want to drink like a shot glass. Like you don't want to be guzzling. I mean, I don't know how people can drink like a 12-ounce. I've seen people walk around. I'm hoping they're taking it home and putting it in the refrigerator for the next day. But that is a lot of bacteria. And bacteria is not one of those things. If a little bit's good, a lot of bits more. I mean, it's definitely a curve where it's good for a while, but then you get too much and it's too much. And so I think that maybe less is more for kombucha. And if you want to make it, absolutely make it. I mean, I find that I make my own elderberry syrup, and I've tried many brands, and I gotta say, I can't find any that's as good as what I make from my preference, from the ones I make myself. So there was a book that came out a couple of years ago called Make It or Buy It or something like that. And what this woman did is she went into a refrigerator and she looked at everything that she bought already made, and she tried to make all of it. And then she decided whether it was worth it. And she decided it wasn't worth making cheese. It was, worth making mayonnaise. It wasn't worth making, and so kombucha goes into that category. It may be worth it to you. For my son, it's worth it. He has jars all over the place. I think he's crazy, but to him, it's worth it because he loves it and he makes the kind that he really likes. And so, yeah, if you feel like doing it, it's kind of a fun thing.
All right, we have a couple more questions. Do you know whether ADHD meds deplete particular nutrients in kids?
That's a really nuanced question. It's a good question. It does deplete, but what we know for sure it depletes, it depletes because it destroys their appetite. We know from a lot of studies that there's a lot of weight loss and growth restriction in kids that take these medicines, depending on when they take them. And we know from working, and I know from working with these kids for many years, that you cannot work around it. So if you give a child an ADD medicine in the morning before they eat breakfast, you can't make them eat breakfast. I mean, unless you give it to them right before. It hasn't kicked in yet, but they're pretty fast acting, a lot of them. And lunch is pretty much thrown away. I mean, unless you give them like cookies or something, then they'll eat sugar. Remember, if you're old enough, if you're as old as I am, you'll remember Dexedrine, which was a diet medicine. Adderall and Dexedrine were used to lose weight, like in the 70s and 80s. That's what they were sold for. So you can't work around it. You can't make somebody want to eat on it. So the problem really is how picky and how disrupted their eating becomes because of the medicine.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a couple more. How much melatonin and vitamin D do you recommend per day? I think that's on your slides, no?
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely talk to, I can't give you a specific one because it just varies depending on the person, because the range for melatonin is usually between 0.5 and 3 milligrams. Most people, that's all that they need. And with kids, we always start with the least amount that seems to get the job done, so they kind of sleep happily.
Right, and then vitamin D, safe to start with.
Again, general, talk to your doctor, but if it's the winter time where you live and you're not outside a whole lot, I mean, in general for adults, I usually tell them about 2,000.
2,000 milligrams.
IUs.
2,000 IUs, because there was another question about vitamin D.
Yeah, vitamin D also comes in micrograms. They sometimes put them as, but that's a completely different measure. Again, the only way to know how much you need, because there's something called a vitamin D receptor. That's genetically determined, and we all have them. And if your vitamin D receptors are kind of wonky, you're gonna need a lot more, even if you're pale like I am. So I'm very pale, and I just couldn't accept it, but it takes me 5,000 units to get my vitamin D up. And I've tried doing only 2,000 for years, and it just didn't work. And so that's what I need. But you may be very, you might have darker skin and need less, or maybe you're in the sun more. Whatever the reason is, the only way to know is to take your best guess and then have your doctor check your levels and see how you're doing.
Great. And
by the way, it's hard. It's hard to get. You have to work at getting toxic and vitamin D.
Okay. One last question. What happens if you have more kombucha than a shot glass worth? What does it do to your microbiome? Have I been poisoning myself?
No. I mean, some people, you can work up to it, like you can work up to other things, and it's just that you can drink, if you're drinking a lot and you're feeling fine with it, you do it. It's just that for most people, it's too much. I mean, but for some people, it's just the perfect amount. There's a lot of individuality with nutrition. So, work with what works for you. I mean, don't listen to what works for me. I mean, talk to your healthcare practitioner and listen to your own body.
Awesome. And if anybody has any other questions, Kelly does consultations. She, as you can tell, she's a wealth of information for kids and adults and the whole age spectrum. We are so glad you're here. Before we all sign off, I just want to quickly, again, thank our sponsors and then show you that Vital Clothing, it's activewear, and they are offering 15% off using the coupon discount code POWERFUL, all capitals, POWERFUL, at vital.com if that's of interest to you. With all of our speaker series, excuse me. It's interesting. I always wonder, why did my throat just do that? Well, I was going to say, with the speaker series, we're going to always try to have some kind of freebie or giveaway or discount. So interesting, the synchrony of that happening. In any case, thank you all for taking the time to be here. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. We are so appreciative. And we hope that you'll join us in March and April. Those are our next events. And thank you so much. And oh, one last shout out. This really would not have gone off as smoothly as it did without the help of Stacy Wright. A huge gratitude beyond words. She's a psychotherapist at Perspectives, and I have just immense gratitude for all your support. So thank you. And I saw someone raising their hand. Do you want to ask a quick question? You're on mute.
I'm going to unmute. Kelly, I just want to say hi to you. I am Catherine Witten's mother. She was in Virginia and she talks to you about little Robbie, and I'm the dietitian mother, and she couldn't see you right now. And so she said, Mom, please, will you please take notes? And so I just wanted to say hi.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi back. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody. Stay healthy. Virtual hugs and lots of love, positive energy.